Anecdotes for success. Level up with truth, meaning, trade-offs, perspective.
All right, we have Glenn Poulos on today. Glenn, thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Awesome. And we were just talking about how we're all doing these different things right now, but we're making this work. So we'll start
Indeed.
off. Oh,
You know,
go
Paul,
ahead, Matt.
no, I was just going to say, I think it fits in Glenn's title of his book. And we'll get into that, Glenn, because I'm interested to hear why you titled the way you did, but I have a sense it might fit some of our
Yeah,
lifestyles a little
for
bit.
sure.
But go ahead, Paul. Welcome, Glenn. Thank you. It's great meeting you.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Matt.
give us some
Glad to be here.
background.
Okay, well, sort of a lifelong entrepreneur. Interesting start. I started as a federal civil servant, as they call them here. I'm live near Toronto, Canada, and I work for the federal government coming out of electronics school. I went to college for electronics, and the after a couple of years working for the government, my boss pulled me aside and he said, like, you're in the wrong job. You need to go into sales. And I wasn't really sure why, but I just knew that my coworkers thought I worked too much and too, like, I was doing things too fast. Give me another project, do this, do that, right? And they're like, slow down, like, and but I guess he saw something in me, and I ended up applying to a sales job, a technical sales job. And I ended up getting it. Some funny stories there. They're in the book, and I can tell you a few of them here as well. But about getting that job, and I kept that job from 1986 to 1991. And in 1991, I approached them about spinning off part of their company and doing the same thing they did, which was sort of technical selling, finding companies from around the world that needed technical sales people in our territory, which was Canada. And I said, look, I want to spin a piece of your business off and focus on one piece of technology. And you can own part of it, I'll own part of it, I'll get to be an entrepreneur, you're an entrepreneur, and everybody will be happy. And the boss said, oh, why don't you show me your plan tomorrow, and I'm going to show you why it probably won't work, you're probably better off just sticking with us. And so the next day, I resigned from the company, and I showed him my plan, which was my which was my exit letter. And one of the funnier things is that I'd only been married about 6 days at the time, and so I also went home to the wife and said, "Oh, by the way, honey, yeah, how you joined the marriage. By the way, I quit my job." And I mean. Yeah, I mean, why didn't I talk to her about it beforehand? I don't know. I guess it was impulsive, but yeah, so I started a company based on this newfangled technology. Now, of course, it never went anywhere. It was the cell phone, right? And of course, nobody uses or needs a cell phone. And I knew it probably didn't have a future, but just like my ex-boss did. But nonetheless, I ran that company for 15 years, and I had sold it to a public company. And the public company, through one thing or another, they ended up closing down our division. And so I ended up having to sort of restart. And it was probably not one of the better parts of my life story. And the public company was not probably the best choice of partners. But in 2007, I had to restart, and I had to create a new company. And because of the way the deal went down, there was no competes or anything like that. I was able to start a new business. And so I started with my initials, GP. I added a vowel to make a word, and I came up with Gap Wireless, and I started Gap Wireless in 2007. And another 15 years later, in 2022, I sold that company again. This time I sold it for 100% cash, but I did agree to stay on with the company, and as they acquire other firms, and help them with integration and running the business and stuff like that. So yeah, so I've built two companies for 15 years each. I've exited twice, and now I have a boss after all those years again, and looking for the next newfangled technology.
That's a great story, Glenn. It's filled with some of the ups and downs that we talk about all the time, and not just business, of course, or entrepreneurship, but in life.
Yeah.
And you've kind of reinvented yourself a couple times. It sounds like,
Yeah.
from sales to entrepreneurship to,
Yeah.
selling, rebuilding, reselling, and
Yeah.
that's a story that I think is very common for successful people. It's not this linear or even angled kind of thing where you start here and then you work for 40 years or 30 years and you end up here. There's a lot of in between there, and oftentimes I speak from experience. I've reinvented myself a handful of times, and probably not done, I would imagine, because you just
No.
never
Right.
quite know. But on that journey there and doing that, I think a lot of people would be frustrated, or willing to settle. Doesn't sound like you were willing to settle in some ways. What is that? Just your personality, or what is that?
So yeah, so the one thing that the one thing that I have that always works in my favor is this incredible fear of being poor, right? And so whenever whenever the tides turn, which they turn often in the economic worlds we live in, right? The I basically I have a saying now which I call it jambok, which I tell the people, and because the business is kind of in the doldrums right now, the economy is kind of unsettled. The telecom industry is coming out of a incredible 2022, but has really hit the brakes in 2023. And so I came up with this term called jambok, which is just make a bunch of calls, right? Like don't sit on your butt, don't be paralyzed, get out from behind LinkedIn and these other things where you think, oh, I'm going to doing prospecting. No, you got to get in front of the customers, you got to overturn every rock. So when I had to restart in 2007, I mean, the interesting thing is when I sold the business, I got very little cash and almost all shares, right? And I was a multi-millionaire at the time on paper, right?
Right.
But of course, I never really had any money. So my life, like I had only the money and the income that I was making year over year, day in, day out, right? So my lifestyle didn't change, right? I didn't go out and buy a Ferrari or something like that. And so I never really felt the impact. I just saw these numbers, in the public markets, how much my shares were worth, and it was millions of dollars. And I'm like, oh, I'm a multimillionaire kind of a thing, right? And then all of a
Right.
sudden, this company fell on hard times, and they ended up sort of scuttling our division, and the shares ultimately went to zero. And so I went from zero here to here, back down to nothing, right? And most people think like, oh, how did you survive that, right? And I'm like, well, like I never got to spend any of the money, and I never really got to even hold the money. I got to brag a little bit here and there, but in losing my job, I definitely had that fear of being poor. And so I thought, what am I going to do? And I thought, well, I can either get a job or I can start another company. And to me, it was easier to start the other company because I had so many goals of what I wanted to do, and just getting a job. I thought like I was running the business, right? And I thought like, what do I apply for? Like salesman, sales manager, director of sales, VP of sales, CEO, like. And I just couldn't come to grips with what I would reinvent myself as an employee. And so I thought, you know what? It's easier to restart the business. Sorry. And I came up with 184 steps that was required to start the business. I approached a partner and we came together as business partners, and I took on the role of sort of general manager. So the, chief operating officer, running the day to day and building up the infrastructure of the business. And that's what I proceeded to do. And I actually still have the same job today, even with new owners. And my title hasn't changed. I'm still the vice president, general manager. I do the same thing. And it's just the company's a lot bigger. We have a lot more people. And we now have other divisions now that they've bought and they've asked me to run for them. And so I just just out of sheer desire to not be broke, I just restarted and just said, hey, I'm going to go do a bunch of things, and I'm going to make it happen. And and it basically worked out okay in the end. Yeah.
Two things quick. First of all, love your story in the beginning. I teach a unique class of high school seniors where they apply and they have a lot of flexibility to search for careers, but they all think
Right.
they're going to have this linear just climb to what they want to do. So every time I meet somebody that has a story that's all over the place, I'm like, see,
Yeah.
it's okay. So
Yeah.
that being said, also, your fear of being poor, I know we all chuckle and smile when you say that. It's true and a real thing. But instead of being paralyzed by it, it almost frees you up to take the actions you need to do. Like there's no doubt in my mind, just in the 15 minutes we've spoke, that if something happened again, you just start something else. That's what
I
you
would.
do.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess it's a gift in a way, but it doesn't take a lot of ingenuity. It's just me, just overreacting to the problem and feeling the need. Like if I'm sitting around like moping about it, I'm just getting poorer, if I can say it that way, right?
Glenn, well,
And
I'm wired the exact same way. When I'm in a fear stage, my reaction is to take action. It's to go
right,
anywhere, somewhere.
yeah,
And the Jambot thing, I absolutely love, and we could probably spend an hour talking about that alone. And
yeah,
frankly, Paul and I will probably talk about it often going forward in our podcast because it's all we talk about action all the time, and it's absolutely an active role. It's like, okay, I'm in a situation. I, I've got to go do something. And we talk about this all the time, Glenn. It's relationships, relationships, relationships. Well, how do I create those relationships? Just make a bunch of calls, right? Just go out and
exactly.
do. Just go start talking to people, and that's
Yeah,
where you're going to find your way out of whatever the problem is. Being,
exactly.
I live in severe the same thing. It's just hitting me.
Yeah,
I love it.
yeah.
But we won't spend that too much because, like I say, we could talk about that all day long. But I wanna transition a little bit into your book. Tell us why you wrote it. Tell us what the title means. Let's talk about your book a little bit if you would.
All right, sure, no problem. So yeah, so I didn't come up with the title actually. My title was a lot more boring. It was called Factors, and it had sort of the keys to selling or something like that. And I thought it was ingenious. And but the but when I submitted it to an editor that I hired, she came back and she said that's this crappy title. It won't rank on Amazon or whatever. And so she picked one of the early on chapters, which are kind of rapid fire rules of engagement when you're out selling, right? And one of them is never sit in the lobby. And so a lot of people are like, well, what should I sit in my car? Sorry, I have a frog in my throat. And and I'm like, no, don't sit in your car. I said, just don't show up too early. And when you get to the lobby, stand. Don't sit down, right? Don't be sitting around, and mainly don't be on your phone. Don't be, playing on the internet or anything like that. And, and be ready and waiting for your client to come through the door and shake their hand and say hello and say what your name, and don't be distracted, right? And I learned that, not the hard way, but I learned it in action where when I was sitting down, like these guys, sometimes 6'4" director of procurement or engineering manager would come out and he'd be towering over me and I'd have to rise up to them. And I only rise up to about 5'6". So
That's
I
like
can't even get all the way up. And so I thought I'm going to start at the maximum height possible. And I learned that it was just a good thing to be, on guard and on ready for when they walk in the door, right? The next rule that comes right after, never sit in the lobby, is always have something in your hand and something in your mind. And everyone's like, what do you mean, right? And I'm like, like literature, the quotation that they ask for. Maybe it's a promo item you're giving away, like a mouse pad or a t-shirt or pen, but oftentimes it's the quotation or the literature, that you're something in your mind is, what do you want to talk to them about? Don't just show up and, oh yeah, how's it going? What are you working on these days? No, you need to have something specific to engage with. And even, as often in probably the last week, I've probably said that, half a dozen times to people. They're like, oh, I don't really know what to say to the guy. And I'm like, just show up with something in your hand, something in your mind. And, and take it from there. Right. And there's all sorts of little tips and tricks throughout the book, because it's sort of 57 tips to build a career and a business in selling. And, and it's just, how do you stay and act in front of a customer, right? So that you're always a pleasure to do business with, or as I like to say, you're a pleasure to do business with always, And or in plain English, don't be a pain in the ass, right? And so there's a lot in there on rapport building, active listening, voicemail skills, and even how to sit at the table when you're at a lunch or a dinner with a customer, all sorts on etiquette. And people are asking, like, why do you have etiquette in your sales book? And I'm like, because you can look like a real idiot at dinner with someone if you don't know how to act. And there's some horror stories in there that I share about some people. And I'm like, obviously, these are what skills you do not want to copy. And there's lots of skills that you do want to copy, right? And people are often joking with me that have read the book now, and we're sitting, maybe we go to a lunch or something, and there's 4 people or 7 people or something like that, and they're like, my meal came, can I start or do I have to wait, right? And I'm like, well, are there more than 6 people? Yep. Okay, you could start. And and there's just all sorts of rules that I've built in on how to behave, where to sit at the table so you get the maximum control of the conversation starters, things like that, right? But it all starts with never sitting in the lobby waiting for the guy to come out. So
I think it's brilliant. And as I've been looking through it, it's something I might be putting in my budget for my students, because they're all business students. They all claim they're going to school, but some of them take a different route and do mentorships and internships, but they're just practical things, because whether you're selling in business or elsewhere, you're selling yourself. I know that doesn't sound right when I said that. You're selling yourself every day for the most part.
Yeah.
No, it's a lot of
happy
practical
to speak
stuff.
to your students at any time if you want to invite me. So I'm
Definitely.
speaking at Ryerson University tomorrow afternoon, and some bright eyes on in the entrepreneurship program. So happy to speak to any class anytime.
I would love that. Even in the beginning of the book, when you talk about don't just fax stuff, like,
yeah, never fax the facts or ship the shit, right?
yeah.
And yeah, I'll tell you about that. But also, just before that, everyone says, like, how'd you write the book and everything? And I said, well, basically I wrote it every weekend. I wrote 2,000 words every weekend until I got to about 75,000 words, and then I sent it to this editor, and she's like, Glenn, you can't swear that much in a book. And I'm like, okay, let's agree on 71,000 words. And and she says, you can say the F word 3 times, a couple of goddammits or whatever, and that's it, right? And I'm like, okay, fine. But, that's just kind of the way I tell the stories, right? And yeah, never fax the facts. And I mean, everyone's like, oh, you need to update that, right? And I'm like, well, if you read the whole chapter, it actually does talk about your cell phone and your computer later. But I said, when I started, the first year or 2, we didn't have a fax machine. And when I would go and I would say, a guy would say, I need a quote, I'd have to come back, and there was actually administrative help, right? There were secretaries or administrative assistants, and they would type out the quotes for us in triplicate on that NCR paper, and they'd break off one, and I would then have to, if you didn't deliver, you would have to mail it to the guy, right? And so the whole thing about doing a quote was like a week-long process, and everybody expected, oh, you send me a quote, it'll be here in a week, right? But I learned that, that even before the fax machine, right, it was better to hand deliver the quote. But then all of a sudden, a couple years into that job, we got a fax machine, and life turned crap from that point forward. It's only gotten worse, right? Because, what started as like you had a week to get the guy a quote, now he's like, oh, can I have it in an hour? Because you just fax it to me, right? But what I learned is that, it becomes a crutch, right? It's like your boss says to you, oh, Jack at Rockwell wanted a quote. Did you get it to him? Oh yeah, I faxed it to him. Oh yeah, I emailed it to him. I emailed him. Oh, what did he say? Well, he didn't get back to me yet. Well, did you talk to him? Well, I left him a voicemail. And I'm like, no, that's fail, right? The guy says he wants a quote. You can then say, oh, great, I'll drop it off. I'm actually in the area on Thursday. Can I drop it off? I'll be there around 10. Oh, I'm really busy. It's cool. I'll just drop it in the lobby, right? And then Thursday rolls around. I show up in the lobby and I say, oh, I'm here with Jack's quote. He goes, is he expecting you? And I go, well, yeah, he asked for a quote. And then they call Jack and say, Jack, Glenn's in the lobby. Oh, yeah, he said, and he forgot that he told me that he was too busy to come and see me. So he walks down. Of course, I'm not sitting, right? And I hand him the quote, something in my hand, something in my mind is, hey, what do you think of the price? I'm like, hey, by the way, I saw you have a new lab, could I get a little mini tour? Right. And everyone's like, well, why is it a mini tour? And because tours are a pain in the ass. Like nobody really likes tours. You're on a bus for 6 hours, stopping, starting. A mini tour only takes a few minutes, take you through the little area that you wanted. Then you can see that your competitor's products are on his desk. He's, his jacket has got the logo of your number one competitor, and your box or whatever that you shipped, like shipped the shit, right? He didn't even unpack it yet, right? And the quote is just so that he can get that third quote for purchasing and buy the product that he always likes, which is not yours. And these are all the rules that I learned sort of in the field on how to not get outsold or, so whenever my people say, oh, I called them, I left a voicemail, and my business partner and I, we have a little joke saying called VMLMCB, right? And that's what we'll say whenever anyone does that. And people are like, what is that you're saying? VMLMCB, right? VMLMCB. And it's when a salesman of questionable sort of stature says, oh, I called him, I left a voicemail. I called and left a voicemail to call me back, right? So voicemail, left message to call me back, right? That's what VMLMCB means, right? And I'm like, yeah, okay, fine. And, when was the last time you seen him? Oh, well, I couldn't get him on the phone, or I couldn't get an appointment, or this or that, or whatever, right? But when you follow sort of the tips and tricks in the book, every call you make is an opportunity to create another call so that you don't need to phone and make an appointment, right? So another tip in the book is never forget a face. And so so remember, you don't sit in the lobby, but if you're too early, you might be sitting in your car, right? So when you're in a car, and I talk about back in the 80s, I had a call book, but obviously now you're going through your phone and you got to go through all the names in your CRM that are listed at that company, Jack, Sally, Susie, Billy, Bobby, whatever. And you got to bring the face from the back of your memory up to the front of your memory, right? And remember, oh yeah, like Jack's that really tall guy. You know what I mean? Bob's the really short guy. Sally has red hair, and have that instant recall. And if you don't, go to their LinkedIn, look at their photo and remember who they are, right? So then you're in the lobby, show him the quote, ask for the mini tour. He decides to give you the mini tour. You're walking through the hall, and all of a sudden these people will start walking by you, and you're like, hey, Jack, hey, Bob, hey, Sally, and this guy's like, holy Christ, this guy knows everybody. And all the people walking by are going, who the hell was that guy? Oh, right, that's Glenn from Gap Wireless. He's a great guy. I love dealing with that guy. He always remembers my name, right? And and it's not that I remember their name. I remember to remember their name, right? And because if you've ever been, the one I always give is like a soccer match, right? And you see all these people, they're the parents of your kids' friends and whatever, and you can never remember their names, right? And it's just so difficult. And it's no different than when you're walking down the hall and they remember your name, and then you can't get their name from the back to the front fast enough, and they're already gone. And you kind of left that crappy impression on them that he doesn't even remember my name, that Glenn guy. Oh yeah, he's just too fancy and this and that, whatever, and highfalutin salesman, and versus the opposite of when you do remember their name, right? And so that's again one of the other 57 tips is never forget their face, right? And so
There's so much more to even just selling with all these tips. These are just life skills, networking skills.
They are, yeah. And I was saying the reason I brought that one up was to say, like, when you're in there and you're doing the the demo, or you're dropping off the quote or whatever, your objective is to try to interact or meet other people and say, hey, I'm already in the building, and that guy Jack was interested in something a little while ago. Hey, can you run me by Jack's desk? I just want to drop it. We've got these new mouse pads. I want to drop one off and check on that thing, and then get Bill to drop you at Jack's desk, right? And then Jack's, I'm kind of busy. Oh, well, I'm back seeing Bill again next Thursday. Can I drop by at 10 and have, catch up with you? Yeah, sure, no problem. Now that guy's confirmed, but the other guy wasn't. But I can call him. I can say, look, I'm back in your building next week visiting Bill. Can I see you, Jack? Right? That kind of a thing. And then you just build. And when you're out in the territories, I never leave the customer without having my next call booked, right? Like there's one of the famous chapters in there on the Winnipeg and my car freezing and wouldn't start in the winter and having to get a new car and all this jazz or whatever. But I mean, I got so much business in Winnipeg because, well, we call it winter peg, right? And because nobody will go there. I mean, it's literally like -40 in the winter there, right? And so most people are like, oh, well, it's February. I'll come and do that demo in June, right? And but I was there every 6 weeks, 8 weeks at the most, and people knew I would always come, and they would have given me the business because I showed up. And these are all the lessons that I learned, and I wrote them down in my book, in my notebook, which became my book later, right?
Well, Glenn, that's super interesting. And like Paul said, there's so much more of this as more than sales, of course, because so many people don't identify as a salesperson, even though I think we all are. I certainly have always identified as a salesperson, no matter what I've been doing, which
Right.
has been a lot of sales, by the way. Do you find that people are, there's this, I'm bored a salesperson or I'm made a salesperson, or what's your take on that?
No, I don't actually believe that. So there's one of my chapters is called greed-based learning, and and I talk about, like people I would we were selling in the day, we were selling 40 different companies from around the world, and each one of them had, 5 or 10 products that they wanted us to flog in Canada for them, right? That's 400 products that I needed to learn. And I was a civil servant. I was fixing weather equipment for Environment Canada up until this point, and I had to learn but what I realized was that it was more about knowing your products and building rapport, right? And it's like, well, how do you learn 400 products? And I'm like, and I learned that later. I didn't learn them. What I ended up happening was that, and it's easier to tell a story using an analogy. And so, I'm not a car guy. Like, I mean, I don't, I don't soup up cars or anything like that. I mean, but, every 4 years when I get a new car, I become a car expert for a very short window of time. Right. And I can tell you, and over the years, my brands changed or whatever, and maybe it was Chevy, Ford, Chrysler, then it was Honda, Nissan, or whatever. Now I'm fortunate enough I can drive a Mercedes, but during that window, I'm able to memorize and learn every little intricate little detail about the 3 or 4 cars that I'm telling my wife I'm buying, right? Oh no, but I got to get the Benz because it's got this and that, and obviously the heated seats and the adaptive cruise control and the 360 cameras and this and that, and it's like, a month before I would never have been able to retain that reading data sheets or anything like that. But because I'm living in a greedy moment, which is what I call it, you're able to absorb things better and without any effort whatsoever, right? Like it never doesn't require me any effort to memorize all of these facts and figures about all these cars, because I know at the end of it, I'm getting a car, right? And I mean, the moment I get the car, I promptly forget it all, right? And I mean, and of course, 90% of the features I barely even use, but it's the same thing with the products that I was selling, high technology products. These are very expensive items with a million features. And, these are what engineers use to do their jobs. But what I was able to do was I was able to, contact the factory and say, look, I got an opportunity to sell this box. It's $28,000. I could figure out what my commission was, in a few minutes or a few seconds, and I would know how much I would make. And I was able to call the guy and say, look, what are the top 5 things I know about this so I don't sound like an idiot in front of this customer? And I would be able to adapt and learn it, and I would be able to absorb it. And again, it's just a human nature, which I call greed-based learning, and everything's greed's bad or whatever. I'm like, it's just like a saying. It's just a little trick that I use, and I'm able to remember it because I know at the end of it that I'm going to get the reward, right? And then in front of the customer, if I don't know something, I would immediately call the factory engineer or whatever right on the spot, and I was able to develop this rapport in selling and this what seemed like technical knowledge, but it was really, as my dad used to say, only thimble deep, right? I would just cut across the top little bullet points of each of the items and learn just enough to sound intelligent, and then I would equip myself with support people, engineers, application people, either with me or on the phone or at my disposal, in order to, complete the sale with the customer, right? And so you're asking me, can anyone sell? Like, I mean, yeah, I ramble on and things like that, but I mean, I am like in some ways also, horrifically shy as well, right? But when I'm excited about the product and I'm given an opportunity to present myself, those barriers sort of break down, and I just try to build rapport and empathy with the customer, and show my product in the best light. And I actually go on in the book about that too. How do you show your product compared to other products, right? And yeah.
I love the greed-based learning. I mean, there's nothing wrong with greed and self-interest if it's value for
Right.
value. And
Yeah.
that's exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Matt, good to have you back with us again.
I know. I don't know why that happened. I haven't moved. Um, no, Glenn, that's resonates with me because I've always thought selling was about believing in what I had to sell and and relationship building. If I had
Yeah,
those two things, I always felt like I could sell anything.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's a good the one section that's sort of not sort of sales, it's more generic, is the section on rapport and active listening. And I love talking about that portion where I explain to people, when you're active listening, you're not really engaging with the person with any feedback other than these sort of, so essentially there's an exercise in the book where you have a conversation, and I suggest you try to do it with your like spouse or someone you're close to or whatever, and you're only allowed to say 5 or 6 things like, oh yeah, really, oh my god, no way, how did that make you feel, and what happened next. And you have to practice the exercise and promise yourself those are the only things I'm going to say, and see what happens at the end of the outcome, right? And so I give a thing about my wife having an altercation on the dog trail with my dog, and she's like, oh yeah, this lady, she was accosting me about this dog off leash and whatever. I'm like, oh my god, no way. And she's like, I'm like, yeah. And she's like, well, I'm like, what happened? And she's like, oh well, blah blah blah, and she was so rude and this and that, and she wouldn't put her dog in. I'm like, no way, oh my god, how did that make you feel, right? And she's going on, and she's like, oh, that was good to get that off my chest, right? And I didn't say anything. All I said was, really, what? Oh really, oh my god, what happened next, and how did it make you feel? And it forces you to not like cliche your customer to death, right? Like, and I think I give some examples in the book as well, where you're heartbroken over your dog dying or something like that, and then everyone's like, oh yeah, well, this too shall pass, or whatever. Like, I'm sorry dude, but that's not what I want to hear the day my dog dies. As and that's just an exaggerated example of where people, they're trying to just shed the stress of what you're saying to them by giving you a cliche, right? Oh, my boyfriend girlfriend dumped me, oh, there's more fish in the sea. Like, you're programmed with these cliches, right? And they're literally the worst possible thing that you can say, right?
Glenn, I would think another benefit to that, maybe this is part of your point, is by allowing someone to do that, you're probably creating some sort of bond, right? That they're getting to get
That's
out
right.
their entire story, and they're in kind of maybe in their own way shedding what's on their mind, and
That's right.
and knowing that by being able to do that with another human being, there's some sort of connection that's very powerfully
Exactly.
made there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, exactly. For me, it's all about building this rapport that becomes a strong bond. So they're happy to see you. Of course, the next time you don't forget their face. When you show up, you always have something in your hand, something in your mind, and it just becomes an entire ecosystem of how to not be a pain in the ass salesperson that people are happy to see when you show up, right? And a lot of times over the years, I sold brands that weren't number one or number two, but I realized later that it wasn't a product of me. Like people would even say like, oh my God, you gave the best presentation, this and that, you the best follow-up, whatever, but you got a shitty product, and I'm buying the number one brand, like, cause I can afford it and that's what I want. Right. And I realized that, if you're working somewhere and your selling of your product requires too much effort, you should switch jobs and you should go and work for a better company and a better product, because your skills as a salesperson has a finite shelf life, right? And so why would you waste time selling the number 3 or 4 brand? There's no way, And so I always caution people to shoot for the higher, the number one or the number two. And I share a lot of strategies on selling the number two brand. And because there's lots of room for them to win as well. And then I also share the strategy of I'd rather be last than second. So even if I am selling the number two brand or whatever, I know pretty quickly I have an in with these guys and I can get this order, so I'm going to stick around. But let's say I know that they have a corporate deal with, Acme, whatever, Acme Construction or Acme Distributing or something. I know I'm probably not going to get the deal. The first second that I know I'm not getting the deal, I back away from the deal and I stop following up and I stop making myself available to them, and I go and find the next customer that the first brand, the tier one brand or whatever, is not paying attention to, and I go and give them my attention and I go and get that order. Because if I stay till the end, I got to fly in factory engineers, take them, to the factory to show them the stuff, do field trials, spend all this money, and I still lose. So why would I do that? Right? So that's why I say I'd rather be last than second and let everyone else fight for the business they're not going to get. Right?
Quit fast, right?
Yeah, exactly. Quit fast. Yeah.
That's awesome. Hey, we're wrapping up time here, and
Sure.
I'm a bit sad because I could listen to your stories and analogies all day. We got the Jambach, right? Just make a bunch of calls.
Yeah.
We got voicemail left message to call back.
Yeah.
I love that one. And really just for the type of audience that listens to us, these are skills. If they have your book, they could start working on this stuff today and be a better person in any aspect of life. Like I'm a big believer it's more than just the sales you're talking about. It's just life skills.
Yeah.
So tell everybody where to get your book. Never Sit in the Lobby, which none of us are doing right now, of course.
Right. Yeah. So you can just go to my website, glennpoulos.com, and you can link to all of the social media and Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Chapters, Indigo in Canada, all that. And you can link to all those sites. I'm very active on LinkedIn. So if you want to connect to me and converse on LinkedIn, I'm really active there. And I'm also on the other channels as well, if you're interested, and happy to talk to anyone at any time. So don't be shy to reach out.
Glenn, thank you. I'll definitely reach out. My students would love
I'd love
you.
to. Yeah, I'd love to do that. Yeah.
Matt, any closing thoughts?
No, Glenn, fascinating. Really well done, and your book, it would be helpful to anyone, not just salespeople, of course. And we appreciate your time and hearing your experience and such is fantastic. I'm going to reach out to you on LinkedIn as well.
Sounds good.
We'd certainly love to have you back in the future.
Oh, I'd love it. Yeah.
And your stories and your experiences right in line with what I'm so passionate about. So I just want to let you know I appreciate it.
Thank you, man. That's amazing. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, and I'm really active on Twitter. I'm gonna put your website on there, and then when this comes out, there'll be a link to your site right on the podcast bio. So
okay,
Glenn, thank you. Good luck. Good luck with your talk tonight with the university students.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks, man.
All right, see ya.
Take care.
Bye.